You just realized that you needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people that you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? Well, in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/BWN. Just go to Indeed.com/BWN right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/BWN. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a Sunday version of the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's March 2nd, 2025, when this podcast is released. We continue our American League Central team previews in this episode, looking at the Cleveland Guardians. Shocking many last year, the Guardians won 92 games, leading to another American League Central Division title. New manager Stephen Vogt won Manager of the Year, and it was another American League Championship Series appearance for Cleveland. But it's still Cleveland, which means they don't spend a whole lot of money. They did make two big trades this offseason, dealing Andres Gimenez to Toronto and notorious White Sox killer Josh Naylor to Arizona. So what should we expect from this Guardians team in 2025? Host of the Locked On Guardians podcast, Jeff Ellis, will join me later in the show. I also trust Jeff's work with the Major League Baseball draft, and he will chat briefly about how this draft class is looking early. First, we have White Sox news to cover, and it wouldn't be spring training without significant injuries. Andrew Benintendi was hit by a pitch this past week in his right hand. After further medical review, Benintendi is now out 4 to 6 weeks. Here is White Sox general manager Chris Getz on Benintendi's injury.
You want players to have a productive spring training, but it comes with risk because you're playing, competitive games still. And unfortunately with Benny, he took one off the hand. Thankfully for Benny and us that, it's not, doesn't need to be repaired by surgery. It's not displaced. And, Lenny and Sosa actually had a similar injury at winter ball this past off season. So he bounced back pretty quickly. So the bone needs to heal, and then we'll get him going. He shouldn't miss too much of the season.
Despite the 4 to 6 week initial diagnosis, Benintendi wants to push his return to the field sooner.
I mean, hopefully, they say 4 to 6 weeks, but, I want to try to push that. And hopefully my bones heal quicker than other people's, so we'll see what happens.
While Benintendi would love to be on the field on opening day, Getz thinks at this time that might be too aggressive within the early stages of the healing process.
It might be. We'll X-ray it just to see how it's healing, and if it is healing, you can get pretty aggressive with these things. But I think safely or conservatively speaking, that might be a little quick.
What the concern is with Benintendi moving forward, it's another hand injury, and he's no stranger to these type of setbacks. He suffered a broken hamate while with the New York Yankees during the 2022 season that also impacted his 2023 season. He missed the final month with the Yankees back in 2022 because of that broken hamate. Benintendi is hopeful this break isn't as serious.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even today, I feel like I can, make a fist and grab. But obviously, you just got to let the bone heal. Like I said, hopefully it's less than 4 weeks. I'm sure I'll talk to them today and we'll kind of come up with a plan and see what happens. want to be out there by opening day, but time will tell.
Then there is the whole idea of getting ready for opening day to consider. Benintendi only had 5 at-bats this spring before getting hit in that hand, so getting his timing down could be an issue, especially with how he likes to utilize a full spring camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think the start of spring so far has been, you're just trying to feel out timing, get some looks at guys. I think obviously this kind of stinks because you want to get your timing down before meaningful games. So I think we're gonna do everything we can. I mean, I'll be in the hit tracks, tracking, doing anything I can just to stay up to speed on that kind of stuff. But we'll go from here and see what happens.
With Benintendi sidelined and possibly missing opening day, Getz shared what the White Sox game plan is without Benintendi.
5 outfielders kind of penciled in for our opening day roster. Obviously, with Benny going down, that changes the dynamic a little bit. With that being said, still have 4 of them. There's different ways to put together a roster. We've got a fair amount of versatility, guys that can play both infield, outfield, and move around in the outfield. So options are still open. We're open-minded, and we're also going to take a look on what's out there as well, if need be. But most importantly, let's get Benny, back. We're thankful that it's not going to be a lengthy amount of time.
Getz is not counting out the idea of him finding outside help to boost the outfield and lineup, but nobody comes to mind, not even current free agent Alex Verdugo.
A little bit of both. I mean, there could be someone out there. No one really jumps out and comes to mind that makes sense for us. That's not with an organization, but you have to remain open-minded as you work through spring training.
Benintendi wasn't the only injury last week for the White Sox. On his 23rd birthday, Colson Montgomery was replaced in the lineup after suffering from back spasms. For White Sox fans, back injuries for a 23-year-old are concerning, but Getz isn't worried.
From what I've gathered from our medical group and listening to Colson, this is dissimilar to issues he's had in the past where he missed a lengthier amount of time. This is a spasm. This is day-to-day stuff. I haven't talked to him this morning, but I would have anticipated he's feeling a lot better. This is purely a spasm. So, I mean, an injury, or not necessarily an injury, but something that can pop up with anyone, certainly in spring training with everyone kind of getting reacclimated with playing. So, not a concern. You're always monitoring workloads for players, whether it be spring training and season. And, if you feel like you're getting sore for whatever reason, you can alter some things. It could be the amount of ground balls, the amount of swings, what you're doing post-workout. There's a lot of different things that go into it. So, we're not going to do anything dramatic just because we know that he's in a pretty good space right now.
It's early, and the White Sox are hopeful that Colson Montgomery is back on the field soon, as Chris Getz likes what he has seen so far in camp.
Yeah, the defense has really stood out. It's very steady, very under control. That's been impressive. Obviously, he's had some really quality at-bats. Hit that home run against the Cubs. He hit a rocket the other day to right field. You're looking at the bat speed, the ball's coming off. For Colson, it's about being a steady defender. Base running needs to be consistent, and his direction at the plate, which will allow him to take advantage of the skills that he has.
Finally, Getz provided an update for White Sox third baseman Bryan Ramos, who has been sitting out with an elbow injury.
He's pretty much full go with his swings, and he's about to be introduced to a throwing program. So, obviously, him playing defense is an important part of his game, and but we want to handle that appropriately. We want to make sure that he can have a productive 25 season as well.
Wednesday night, March 26th, will be Opening Day Eve, co-hosted by Sox Machine and our friends from the 108s at the Ramova Theater. Come join us as we get ready for another season of Chicago White Sox baseball, or at least pretend to be excited. Special guests include Jim Callis of MLB.com, as he'll talk about the top White Sox prospects and answer your questions live about the farm system. Courtney Finicum of Baseball is Not Boring podcast. She stole the show last year and is ready to dish her predictions for 2025. Jim Margulis and James Fegan will have a live PO Sox segment to answer questions from the audience, and our friends from the 108s will close out the show by making their very wild and entertaining predictions, including the famous steak dinner bet between Beef Loaf and I. Tickets are just $20, doors open at 6 p.m., and the show will start at 7:30 p.m. Purchase your tickets at RamovaChicago.com or in the ticket link in this podcast post on SoxMachine.com.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back on the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Your data is like gold to hackers. They're selling your passwords, bank details, and private messages. McAfee helps stop them. Secure VPN keeps your online activity private. AI-powered text scam detector spots phishing attempts instantly. And with award-winning antivirus, you get top-tier hacker protection. Plus, you'll get up to $2 million in identity theft coverage, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax, for a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
Joining the Sox Machine podcast to help review the 2025 Cleveland Guardians is a host of the Locked On Guardians podcast and someone I trust covering the Major League Baseball draft. It's Jeff Ellis. And Jeff, great to talk to you again. Thanks for joining the Sox Machine podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on. You guys have been doing fantastic work for a lot of years over there, so it's a real honor.
How big of a shock, just like taking a step back to last year in 2024, was watching that Cleveland Guardians team? Because I'll be honest with you, Jeff, I did not see 92 wins coming. There was a bit of me that was wondering, with Francona gone, is he taking the Magic with him? Clearly that did not happen, because the Guardians not only won the division, but they made it all the way to the American League Championship Series. Was last year a huge surprise for Guardians fans?
I don't think there's any way you can say anything other than like, yes. Now, in fairness, I'll say I did not think they were as bad as they were the previous year. In 22, for instance, they had 2 sweeps all year. Like, they just, for whatever reason, could not find any continuity throughout the year. And I'll be honest, like, last year was magical for a lot of reasons. Like, every level, things were going well. Like, you had the first pick in the draft, the minor leagues, a lot of players broke out. And this team made the postseason, even though they had a bottom 5 rotation, which is not what you expect from the Cleveland Guardians. Like, you always expect if you're going to make the postseason, it's because of pitching. And they didn't have pitching a year ago, at least not starting pitching. Let's be fair. The bullpen, which I thought they would need to go out and trade for some horses. I was arguing they should sign guys in free agency a year ago. So I'm doing a lot to show I have no credibility or knowledge when it comes to the Guardians. But, Cade Smith never showed that command in the minors. Like, he's always had good stuff. Tim Herron leveled up. Hunter Gaddis. Like, I thought these guys would be solid. I didn't expect one of the greatest bullpens in the history of the modern game. And that bullpen did a lot of heavy lifting. And, there was holes in the lineup. There were guys who definitely underperformed. There was, Stephen Kwan was hitting 400 until July. And then from July till September, he hit under 200. It was a weird year. And there's a lot of reasons why they shouldn't have been successful, but they kept finding ways. And that bullpen was a big part of it. That bullpen, in many respects, was what carried them as far as they went.
So let's talk about the offseason. How did the Guardians follow up last year's magical run? We know Cleveland is never known to be a big spender, but there are multiple trades that happened in this offseason, Jeff, where it made me start thinking, what are the Guardians doing here? Are they cash strapped? Do they just need to unload contracts to free up some money? Are they going to sign somebody else with this money freed up? Help me understand a little bit more what the Guardians are trying to accomplish this offseason.
I will say they're payrolls are basically identical, maybe a little bit higher than starting a year ago, not ending. But they went out and made some trades, which caused their payroll to jump. They added like close to $9 million at the deadline last year, so that's the difference. My co-host on Locked On Guardians, Justin Lotta, and myself, we do like so many podcasts, and we got to come up with things. And we did, if an expansion draft happened, who would you protect? And I talked him out of protecting Andres Gimenez. I was like, no, it's an underwater contract. No one's going to take that contract. In terms of Sox fans, you can really compare the two best years of Yolmer Sanchez, I probably said his name wrong, to the last 2 years for Andres Gimenez. Like, they had very similar runs created pluses, Gold Glove second baseman. Now, Gimenez's defense is otherworldly. That's why he got the Platinum Glove. But offensively, there's a lot of room for comparison. And he is someone who, he's 11 million this year. That's fine. He's 15 million next year. That's fine for his defense, even if he's a below average bat. But he's got 3 years where he's going to make 24 million, essentially. Ooh. And I don't know how they convinced Toronto to take him for Spencer Horwitz. And Spencer Horwitz would still help this team now. And they got a prospect. And then they flipped Horwitz for pitching. And they got two really interesting prospects. We had some talks with people in the system who, Josh Hartle's who they got their pocket pick by. That's who they really wanted to land over, I believe, Joey Oki, who is a fantastic prospect as well. Josh Hartle was a guy they targeted and thought they could fix. So that was a player they really liked. And of course, Luis Ortiz is probably, would have been their number 2 starter a year ago, not counting Boyd. Like, if we're talking about the start of the year, he'd been in their 3 with Boyd. And pitching was so dang expensive. This team fixed Boyd and he got 16 million, I want to say. Alex Cobb barely appeared for this team. He got 15 from the Tigers. So you had to find other ways to get pitching and they couldn't get it. So Gimenez, I look at that as, you're going to miss his defense. He's the best defensive second baseman I've seen in my life. And I got to see Roberto Alomar play that position for a few years when I was growing up. The things he did were magical. It was truly special, but offensively he had steady decline. Josh Naylor was a case of inconsistency in Cleveland, very up, very down. Conditioning has been brought up many times. It was even mentioned in the post-conference when they traded him. And he was also on a 1-year deal. I think he's going to have a huge year because Arizona is incredibly hitter friendly. Like, he is going to have a year. It's a very different park from Cleveland. So, but I think Slade Ciccone was a guy they targeted because, again, this team starting pitching was bottom 5 in baseball a year ago, and they couldn't go into free agency and add starting pitching. They couldn't. They got Shane Bieber to come back because he was hurt and there's comfortability. Jake Junis they signed late. John Means. Basically, John Means saw what they did for Boyd and agreed to come on a sweetheart deal that's a no lose for Cleveland. But they couldn't compete with the Sharks. So they moved Naylor. Slade Ciccone, interesting story came out that like the Rays have been trying to get him. And when Cleveland and the Rays want to target a pitcher, that's a guy I'm all in on. And Arizona's development hasn't been grand. Like a lot of, Ryan Nelson's looking good. Brandon Pfaadt is finally looking like he's going to be that guy. But they have a lot of other guys who have not kind of leveled up. So I understand why they made those trades. It was a little bit weird in free agency. I understand the first base market went quick. They seem to think age is the new market inequality. They went for a lot of older, Paul Sewald, older coming off injuries. Carlos Santana at his age. They kind of mined the older side of it. Manager-wise, I think Voit was a breath of fresh air. Terry Francona was fantastic. You can't say anything too negative there. But the one thing you'll say is like he was very much an old school manager. And I think some of the changes they were able to make and some of the improvements, honestly, came from having someone who was more new school, who was willing to kind of vary from the plan a little and take some new approaches. And, I thought he was fantastic. I don't think fans feel too betrayed because Vogt was so good and they understood why Terry took the year off. And I think anyone, like on the podcast, I said he's not going to sit out. That dude lives and breathes baseball. As soon as he's healthy, he'll be back. And I think most people don't begrudge him. It's a little weird him going to the Reds, staying in Ohio, I think. But for me, I know some fans were really upset by the offseason because they sold to their, to the people who are mad. It was they sold off to centerpieces. But I think when you take a step back, you look at the fact that like Kyle Manzardo should be ready to take over at first. CJ Kayfus is a really interesting prospect. Santana had similar numbers to Naylor a year ago. They were very similar players, and he's a much better defender. And I don't, I'm not a small man. I don't know if there's a video side of the podcast you'll show, but it's like, Santana's just in better shape than Naylor, and Naylor had injuries last year was the first year he didn't miss a month due to injury, and that's just always a concern. You can look at some of the great players of unusual size, of Prince Fielder and the like, and it's often they don't last as long. And I think they had a good offseason. I think though they are kind of treading water, I think is what I'd say. I know most people, like if someone wants to be upset because they made the ALCS and didn't improve, I think that's fair. Because they are probably, I think, just about as good as a year ago on paper. You're hoping, and what they're hoping for, and what they've kind of said in the conferences is some of those young guys to step up and perform that are near the cusp of the big league. Someone like Chase DeLauter comes to mind. And I'll also be the person to point out that, the three best outfielders this team has drafted and developed since Manny Ramirez are, Stephen Kwan, which everyone knows, and then Luke Scott and Ryan Church. It's not, they've had a rough developmental history. So I'm going to be curious to see who steps up and what happens. I think overall it was like probably like a B minus offseason. Because I mean, I do understand, but I think what killed them is the TV contract.
Yeah, Cleveland, along with, it seems like half the league right now is battling local TV, getting that money, finding a home for people to watch their games for the upcoming season. The White Sox may have a network, but it's still difficult to find them or watch them. So the White Sox will be in that boat as well heading into the season. We'll see how it impacts all these teams trying to figure out the local TV money situation. So let's break down as far as position player groups. And what I would like to start with is the starting pitching, because this could be the difference for Cleveland if they're going to repeat as far as American League Central champions, or if there's any team in the American League that could step up and really challenge whatever powerhouse comes out of the American League East, the Yankees, the Orioles, maybe even the Red Sox. And that could be a deciding factor if Cleveland can muster better performance in the starting front. What's the plan here, Jeff, for the starting rotation? What does the 5-man rotation look like heading to opening day? Are we expecting Shane Bieber? Are we expecting John Means to be ready from the get-go?
For those who didn't watch them a year ago, statistically, Carlos Carrasco, Tristan McKenzie, and Luke Allen were three of the worst starters in the American League. So they literally had a rotation by the end of July, they had the two worst starters in the American League in their rotation, which might be hard to believe, but that's the situation they were in. Their bullpen has more what-if potential, or their rotation, I should say, has more, I think, what-if potential than maybe any rotation in baseball. Tanner Bybee is, he's the one thing you trust. He's the one arm you trust, the one guy who everything has worked out and gone well for, the one guy you hope they're going to get an extension for this offseason. After that, it is a lot of hope and a prayer, because every player is, I don't want to say undefined, but you have massive question marks. Like Luis Ortiz, he was a bullpen guy for most of the year. I think he had, 10 starts. You're probably scheduling him as your number 2. Your number 3 could easily be Gavin Williams, who was horrendous last year. He dealt with injuries. He had a great, I always get this confused in my head. It's one of those things. One of his secondary pitches was fantastic as a rookie, and he didn't throw it at all. He just kind of he was afraid of his elbow and he wasn't throwing it. So he was really ineffective. That's why he wasn't in their postseason rotation, basically, until they had to use, they saved him in case they needed an extra starter if they had won in the Yankee series. They were really gun shy about going to him. Ben Lively was a nice surprise, and he's probably your 5, but they left him off the postseason roster against the Tigers for a reason. It was a lot of luck with him. He overperformed. There's no way around it. He overperformed. And then I think Slade Ciccone will eventually be someone they look at, but when they got him was with the idea of scrapping his 4-seam fastball and he's working on a sinker and a cutter, but they're remixing him. So he's not really that option. Shane Bieber's probably not. If you're a Guardians fan, you're hoping for a July return. Means is probably not till mid-August. So those guys aren't going to be there. They're kind of, someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to be ineffective. They're using a lot of that approach they did by going out and trading for Cobb and signing Boyd and some of those moves they made. They're kind of pre-doing them now instead of waiting. And then, so the what if is Gavin Williams 2 years ago was in most places more highly believed in than Tanner. So it's if he can get it back with his size, his stuff, you've got a 2-3 there. Ortiz looks like he should be his savant data is ridiculous. Like, it's all good, but he doesn't miss enough bats, even though it's good, which is always a concern for me. And then I haven't mentioned Tristan McKenzie at all, who, I mean, was a dark horse Cy Young candidate 2 years ago, and basically has had 2 lost years. And one was injury, and then last year, he just looked like he didn't trust himself. Like, he was throwing with good velocity. A lot of fans are like, is he hurt? Does he need surgery? He should have got surgery 2 years ago. He just looked so tentative. He looked like a player who had lost confidence. So that's the what if of it. Like, can McKenzie bounce back? Because then you've got a top 20 American League pitcher instead. If Gavin Williams can be healthy and put it together, if Ortiz can last as a starter, if Bieber can come back and look like the guy of a year ago. The one nice thing is, I mentioned all these names. I haven't mentioned Joey Cantillo, who's got excellent stuff, but there's some command issues. But he's looked, I mean, it's spring trading, so take it for what it's worth, but he's shown that command. And some of the other young pitchers who are ready, which a year ago, I mean, they were forced to ride Carlos Carrasco way, way too long. Like, we all knew he was cooked, and he was there till the end of July because they just didn't have anyone. So they went out with a plan to acquire depth, and some of these guys aren't going to work. And that's why they added so many guys.
Then moving over to the bullpen, and we know that relievers this is a very volatile market, especially for teams. You have a great year with your bullpen. That doesn't necessarily translate over to the following year. Something happens. Guys get hurt. Guys get ineffective. Teams have better scouting reports, getting ready for that opposing bullpen. So because it was such a huge determining factor in the success for Cleveland last year, and they still have Emmanuel Clase, and you mentioned Cade Smith and Hunter Gaddis and now Paul Sewald. Are you confident that the Guardians relievers can repeat 2024 despite the heavy usage from last year?
I don't think they'll repeat it, if I'm honest, just because I think that was a special year. I think it was that year where everything went right. I think it was too good to repeat. That being said, I still think they're going to have a top 3 bullpen. I still think that, Class A, outside of 20, having that moment where I forget my years, outside of 22, where he all of a sudden blew more saves in a season than any, he had more blown saves that year than Chris Perez had during his time in Cleveland, for any deep cut Cleveland fans out there. He's always had a sub-2 ERA. Like, he has a legitimate case for the best reliever in baseball. I don't think a lot of people would say he doesn't have that case. I mean, maybe we can get in the weeds and argue if he is or isn't, but he's in that conversation. Cade Smith he's always had good stuff. And I think even with extra tape, he's going to be really effective. I do wonder about Hunter Gaddis. There are points where he's looked very hittable, but the data is, again, fantastic. Tim Herron, also like a sub-2 ERA. Like, I love Tim Herron. We had him on the show. He's a quarterback turned pitcher. He's got a lot of great traits. I don't think people expected him to be one of the best left-handed relievers in baseball. But the nice thing is they do have those horses. Andrew Walters was arguably the best reliever in his draft class 2 years ago. I mean, I don't even think arguably was the top reliever 2 years ago. And Sewald, the interesting story there is that when he was with Seattle, when he was kind of at peak, his bullpen catcher was Stephen Vogt, or his bullpen coach was Vogt. So that's someone who's very well known to the org. Gimenez had some good data, and Eric Sabrowski is a guy I never believed in. I'll just be honest. That was a guy in the minors. I believe he was a minor league Rule 5 pick even, who looked amazing down the stretch. And they have a few guys in the upper minors, but they kind of need this pen to stay healthy. They've got a few depth arms, but I will say that is the one thing. Trevor Stephan should come back at some point as well. And we'll have to see how he returns. Tommy John surgery. A lot of guys don't get that command back right away. So, but they don't have a lot of depth, and that's going to be the issue. If they have any health issues in the pen, out of the gate, the guys who are like their depth guys also have health issues. So it's a little bit thin in that regard. And I think that's why they went out and signed some guys. I know Cleveland fans are like, I wish we had signed a bat, but you're not signing a bat for $7 million for the Sewald money. You're just not getting that in free agency. So I think they made a smart choice to give themselves a little more depth and to give themselves some different looks too, because teams did see that pen an awful lot.
So if you're going to get to Cleveland, if you want to feel confident for opposing teams, the first 5 innings are going to be critical. It sounds like, Jeff.
Yes.
You have to score some runs against that starting rotation. Because if that bullpen does repeat 2024, it's going to be tough to find a way to score some runs from the 6th to 9th innings, which then turns the attention over to the Guardians lineup. And I'm asking you this question, Jeff, on behalf of all fans of the American League Central. When is Jose Ramirez leaving Cleveland? Okay. These guys don't stick around forever in Cleveland, Jeff. They don't. So when is he going away? When are the Guardians trading him away? Please, for the love of all baseball, for everyone in the American League Central, when is Jose Ramirez leaving Cleveland?
For non-Cleveland fans, I think sadly never. His contract is through 2028. I believe it's like he signed that extension, and he's already talked about wanting to stay beyond that. I was covering the minors when Jose Ramirez came up, and he was always a different cat. Like, I'll remember they had like the time where you'd go and speak with the translator, like not speak, like, practice. And there'd be one time for everyone else and a separate time for Jose. And Jose often wouldn't show up, was the story, is because he wanted to focus on baseball, and his English, in his mind, it was good enough for his teammates to understand. And that's all he needed. Like, he always kind of just did his own thing, and, it can't argue with his results. So, but one of those things that's unusual is like how much money that dude left on the table. I mean, he's pretty much a Cleveland legend at this point, because we haven't kept anyone. I'm in my 40s, and like Omar Vizquel is the last like multi-time All-Star who they chose to let walk because he was in his late 30s. Kenny Lofton came back at least after they traded him away. Like we don't keep guys ever in Cleveland. And I know Chicago has had a lot of players leave at various points as well because of ownership not being willing to pony up. So I'm sure fans can appreciate that understanding of frustration where you sometimes don't want to form a bond with any of the players, like in terms of a favorite, because you just feel like they're going to be gone. But Jose loved it here. It feels like he is going to be here shattering records until he can't play anymore. And I thought maybe we're starting to see because he's a smaller player, and smaller players traditionally don't age as well. That's just the truth of it. Guys who are 5'8", 5'9", the wear and tear builds up, and he started slow, but he didn't stay slow. Like he exploded throughout the year and ended up with another top 5 finish. And he is just it's a joy to watch. I mean, you have to go back to like 2019 when he got hurt for a sub 4 year, and other than that, it's been every year since 2016, not counting 2020 because that's weird for data in general. But it's like he is the one consistent with this team and with that lineup.
Well, he was close to winning the American League MVP in 2020. I mean, he made that a very close race with Jose Abreu, especially with how hot Ramirez got late in 2020 for the Guardians. Okay, so that's the disappointing news. Jose Ramirez is going to stick around for a while, which is annoying, but also great because he is a great ball player. But for Cleveland with this lineup, other than Steven Kwan, who has turned into a terrific player in its own right for the Guardians, who's going to help out Kwan and Ramirez in scoring runs for the Guardians in 2025?
I think their hope is that Lane Thomas is going to be, I think, anyone who watches baseball in depth knows that like the all-star Lane Thomas was aided by a lot of batted ball luck. That he is not that dude, but that he can be a very good player who has a lot of good traits and, could be hopefully close to like a 2020 type of guy. So they're counting on him. Kyle Manzardo, who they got for Aaron Savale a few years ago. Story is at the time they were actually working on a Bieber to the Raid deals, and then Shane needed surgery, and that was the end of that deal, and they pivoted. Manzardo on his recall was fantastic. Like they had him hitting 2 in the postseason because of how effective he had been for the team, which is such an important spot in the lineup. You're also betting on Carlos Santana, which is a weird thing to say for a soon-to-be 39-year-old, but they paid him $12 million, which is, more than I believe Naylor got in arbitration. Like they knew when they made that trade that they were paying more for Santana than it would be to keep and pay Naylor. So they believed in Santana and his adjustments. And then after that, it's a lot of wish casting and hoping, or, it's, Bo Naylor last year I thought was going to be critical to the team, and then it was rough. He had such a great finish during his rookie year that I'm like, okay, this is a breakout. And then it wasn't there. Brian Rocchio was fantastic in the postseason, but he struggled to hit most of the year. Second base is up in the air. Right field is kind of up in the air. So you've got those other positions where no one's 100% sure they know who is going to play there. And you're kind of hoping for guys like Naylor and Rocchio to stabilize, to find their level, and that it's above average. And then you're kind of hoping that, some of the young guys will settle in the outfield and second base, and that the lineup will be potentially better than a year ago. But it's a lot of hope and prayer. You're kind of set up on paper to be similar to a year ago, if maybe slightly worse, if only because like the second base position, Gimenez was not good a year ago. He was bad offensively. So it's not going to take much to have improvement at that position.
So let's talk about second base. What's the plan for Cleveland to start in 2025 at second base with Gimenez gone?
I feel like it comes down to two names. It's Gabby Arias, who, if you go way back, was, I truly believe at the time, the centerpiece of the Mike Clevenger deal. I know Josh Naylor and Austin Hedges were in that deal. Cal Quantrill. I mean, Cleveland ended up doing fantastic. That deal was huge for them. But Gabby Arias was the dude. He was the prospect. Even Joey Cantillo was in that deal. That's how many pieces they got who helped the major league team. He has always had big tools. He has, big power. I thought he was going to be maybe the heir apparent to Jose Ramirez if he didn't do an extension. And 2 years ago, his platoon splits, he had almost I want to say a 1 something in the teens against righties. Like he hit righties really well. So he had reverse platoon splits. Couldn't hit lefties at all. Last year, they kind of bounced him around a bit. There's some points where he looks, I don't know, I would say disinterested, like that he wants to be the shortstop and he wasn't the shortstop. He apparently, there's some great talk of coaching up and taking advantage of his tools. And he's hit some really hard shots between winter ball and spring training, and he's out of options. So that's the one guy. And the other one is Juan Brito, who, if you think back to 2 years ago when Nolan Jones was just looking like the bright spot for the Rockies, that's who they traded Nolan Jones for. And, Juan Brito is it'll be quite the drop defensively. He's a below average defender, but a switch hitter, really great contact skills, sneaky pop for his size. He is not Jose Ramirez. He is not Jose Ramirez. I'll say it again, but he has kind of that like sneaky pop for that side. Like he's a 5'8" guy, high contact. He reminds you of Jose Ramirez before Jose Ramirez became Jose Ramirez. When Jose Ramirez was that guy who came up as a rookie, before all of a sudden he ended up, changing, revamping, and finding power and everything else. He looks like the original version. Without Jose was a better defender in the minors. So I think it's probably one of those two guys. And, Gimenez was, I think, on 81 runs created plus. He was 20% worse than the league average. It doesn't take much to beat an 81. And, that's the one thing, like for as much as now defensively, they're not going to get anywhere close. Like that's a huge loss, but they are, they should, on paper, one of those two guys should be able to outproduce what they had there a year ago.
Offensively.
Yes.
Not defensively. Got it.
No, nothing close.
You mentioned the Stephen Vogt and Guardians fans being confident and Francona going to Cincinnati. That was something that was on my mind, but sounds like some are a little jaded that Francona took the job in Cincinnati.
Yeah, there was some. For that same group of fans, though, I feel like then they felt like, how fans are when it comes to your hitting and pitching coaches, right? Like they were very happy then when the hitting coach went with Francona, and I'm like, guys, that's a sign of like that Francona worked well in that 1 year with that dude. But they, there is. I understand for some people it's the shock that it's Cincinnati. I think it's like that it's so close, but he's just such a baseball rat. Once he got healthy, what else was he going to do? Like that is a guy where it's like, if he's not in the game, what is he going to do? Like when Boston fired him, I believe he did like TV for a year before he came here. Like he hasn't, I know he's got a family, but I feel like he is that guy who's just been in the game, and that's all he knows. Like he has nothing else set up. I mean, he even brought I think Brad Mills is his bench coach. Went and got Millsy out of retirement, who had been the bench coach like 3 years ago here. So yeah, he's they brought Bryan Shaw back to Cincinnati, his
Sure
cribbage
did.
partner. Those two apparently Cleveland gave Shaw $5 million in his last year in Cleveland, basically said he could pay cards with Tito. So it's you know, I the nice thing I'll say is them being a National League team, the blowback can't be too high. Like it would take meeting in the World Series, which for both these teams is an unlikely outcome. Let's be honest. Like I think Cleveland is going to battle for the postseason. I think they have a good chance to make the postseason, but and I'm not an in-depth Reds guy, but it feels like either of those teams making a World Series is a fantastic outcome and very unlikely.
So then about the expectations for Cleveland in 2025, is it division or bust again for the Guardians? Is that the thinking right now for Cleveland, is that they should be the favorites because they are the defending American League Central champions?
It's one of those things all over the board. I'll say, like, some people think this team's going to be terrible because they made those trades. Other people say, they're about the same. I think it's postseason or bust. I do. I think for as much as people love to rip on the AL Central, we don't have unbalanced schedules anymore. Like, that's not a thing. Everyone plays everyone the same amount of times. And there's a reason why they had all of the postseason squads they did. Like, it's a tough division. It's going to be a dogfight all year. I mean, Cleveland struggled with the White Sox at points this year. Like, they were not a team that they won the division with, I think the White Sox might have been their worst record in the division at the end of the year. It was interesting to watch. So I think they are in that battle. I don't know, Kansas City's moves, I'm kind of I'm not sure if they improved or if they're kind of the same. Like, I felt like Cleveland, Detroit made some moves to improve. I don't know how much though. It felt like no one in the division really, to me, and I could be wrong, head and shoulders improved in the offseason. I feel like everyone kind of did smaller sideways improvements. Now, I think for all of these teams who are hoping to compete, they're hoping the improvements are going to be the internal ones. That, with Detroit, it's going to be Jackson Jobe and some of those other guys, and with Kansas City, it's some of their next wave. So I feel like that's where they're all hoping it's going to come from. But I mean, baseball's weird. Like, year to year, we can all sit there and think of every year a team we expected to be good who somehow completely falls apart, and a team that we didn't have expectations on, like Cleveland, that stepped into it. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I think they'll have multiple playoff teams again from the Central. I think it is a good division. I think that, you don't have everyone make it. And then, I mean, the Royals gave the Yankees, a bit of a scare at points. The Tigers knocked off the Astros. I think the West is weaker than the Central. I got to be honest. I know Oakland went out and spent money. I'm still not sold on them. So I think the Central is going to be tough. I'm not going to sit here and say they have to win the division, but I think if they don't make the postseason, it's got to be a disappointment after you made it to the ALCS the year before.
And then I can't let you leave without asking about the MLB draft, because we both cover it in great depths. What are your early thoughts about the 2025 MLB draft class?
I feel like it's got good depth. Before we came on the air, I was talking with you that I think it's a good year for the White Sox to have their penalty. Like, the top of the class is not as exciting to me. They can stay at 10 and draft Evan Taylor, and, just feels like a very White Sox type of guy. And it's fun from that perspective of someone who follows this, because Cleveland and the White Sox really became very similar. Like, these two teams love the Cape. They love high performers from there. These are two teams that think along the same lines, it feels like right now, in terms of draft and approach. So I feel like whenever I do work on Cleveland, I'm also doing work on the White Sox. I feel like they're probably maybe you could think of someone else, but to me, those are the two teams that most mirror each other right now. At least from the Cleveland perspective, it's definitely for me the White Sox. But I think it's a good year to have, multiple picks. I feel like whoever the White Sox do land is going to be not that much, if maybe, the similar. I really like Tyler Bremer and Jamie Arnold, and then after that, it's all kind of the same to me. I'm always more conservative though. High school kids are always a bit scary to me. I'll be the first to admit. And, I think going through, this is a class that is very top heavy with high school talent, and that, it's going to be, we've seen teams kind of shying away from high school players because now there's so much data in college. It's easier and easier to be successful with those college players because we know so much. So it's going to be interesting to see who's willing to gamble on the high school talent. Do we see kind of another year where it's mostly college players early? And there are good college players. There's guys who can step up. But all of your best guys, even someone like Jace Lavalette, I'm not gonna say his name right, Lavalette, it's like you got to see less swing and miss. Like I love.
Yeah, before this weekend, he's got 4 hits. They're all extra bases. 3 of them are home runs, but that's it. He's got 4 hits in 6 games.
It's like to me, I know a lot of people talked a lot of different ways about recent White Sox prospect Braden Montgomery. I was never worried about the ankle. To me, it was like his K rate, which he managed to get down. But it's like that 20% K rate has really been a big separator for college players. Like you want to see that come down, and that's kind of like that number. And there's just, it's like some people are talking Brendan Summerhill is like a top 3 college bat, and it's like he's got 50 grade power at best. Like that's the problem, where it just kind of feels like a weaker group. And I'm very curious to see who can step up, right? Like, because every year someone steps up into that void. There's someone who performs better. There's someone who falls. And I don't know. The one thing I'll say is I felt like a year ago at this time, we already saw like Condon rising from like back of the top 10 to the top. Now, performance in Colorado, maybe don't look at that as it was really ugly. But like we saw those guys rise pretty early. And I know we're only a month in, but I don't have a lot of guys where I'm jumping up. So I think, the depth is there. There's interesting names. There's people to follow. Maybe Merrick Houston's the guy, though. I wish I had his exit velocities. His exit velocities last year were terrible. Like he was below 100. So it's like all of a sudden this guy's hitting home runs left and right. They do have, great development at Wake. So I wish I had that. And he was awesome in the Cape. So yeah, there's some guys to look at. I don't know. Ike Irish is probably that guy that I kind of like more than others, especially when I was able to get a hold of some of last year's data and look at. I'm going to be very intrigued to kind of watch and see who rises, who doesn't. But like, honestly, like I said, I think the White Sox perfectly. Like last year, like Hagen Smith, fantastic. Like, the ceiling on him is like, I like Jamie Arnold more because he's safer, but anyone who talks ceiling, it's like Hagen Smith is, the one cream of the crop. There isn't a Hagen Smith right now. Like, I feel like Hagen Smith would be potentially number 1 in this class. Like Braden Montgomery, if he doesn't get hurt, would potentially be someone we talk about number 1 in this class. Like, that's the situation where it is. So I think for those teams picking at the back of the top 10, I think you're going to find good value. And I think it is kind of nice to have multiple picks. I understand why like the Dodgers and the Guardians traded for comp picks. I think it's a good year to kind of spread it around and try to get some guys late, because it's the prep class, I think, is deeper than a year ago. I think the college bats are really weak, though.
It's off to a slow start. That was my last draft report. For those that are listening to this, you can go find it, especially for our Patreon supporters. Guys are starting slow. It'd be nice to see them get picked up, because for some of these players, once they conference play, it's going to be hard to build up your numbers, especially if you are in the SEC. You can listen to Jeff and their fantastic podcast. I listen to it all the time to keep track of how Cleveland is doing. The Locked On Guardians podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow Jeff on Twitter. He's at Jeff MLB Draft, but he's doing more now on Blue Sky, just like we are at Sox Machine. You can find him on Blue Sky as well, Jeff MLB Draft over there. And Jeff, thank you again for taking the time to join us on the Sox Machine podcast to talk a little MLB Draft, but more importantly, get us ready to understand where the Cleveland Guardians are heading into 2025. Thanks again for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
That will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Apple Music and Spotify. You could also listen and watch the show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow our beat reporter, James Fegan, at JR Fegan. You can follow me at Sox Machine _Josh, or on Blue Sky at Sox Machine Josh. If you enjoy our work and want full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox, Major League Baseball, and even the Major League Baseball Draft, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. Our Patreon supporters get an ad-free version of both the podcast and website. We still have spots remaining in our Veterans Committee, which you get to be part of a group chat, a group text with James Fegan, who shares additional insight, gossip that he hears at spring training and from the White Sox clubhouse. Perfect for the uber diehard White Sox fans. So if that's of interest to you, again, go to patreon.com/SoxMachine to sign up. Monthly plans start at $5. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.